Dr. Samuel Carter was a renowned cardiac surgeon at St. Matthew's Hospital, known for his surgical precision and charismatic presence. His career spanned over 2 decades, and he had saved countless lives in the operating room. However, beneath the surface of his professional success lay a man who couldn't resist indulging in the darker temptations of his personal life. It was the summer of 2019 when Dr. Carter met Emily Hayes, a bright and ambitious medical intern just starting her rotation in the cardiology department. Emily, with her striking looks and dedication to her work, quickly caught Dr. Carter's eye. Despite being twice her age and married with 2 children, he found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain, or perhaps didn't want to. It began innocently enough with casual conversations over coffee and late-night shifts spent together in the hospital's bustling corridors. But as the weeks passed, their relationship escalated from professional admiration to something far more dangerous. What started as a clandestine flirtation soon blossomed into a full-fledged affair, hidden from the prying eyes of their colleagues and the hospital administration. Dr. Carter and Emily would sneak away to his private office or meet in secluded hotel rooms across town, careful to keep their relationship under wraps. Emily, young and impressionable, fell deeply in love with Dr. Carter, believing that he would eventually leave his wife for her. But for Dr. Carter, it was nothing more than a thrilling escape from the monotony of his life, a way to relive the excitement of his youth. As the months went by, Emily grew more attached and demanding. She began to push Dr. Carter to make good on his whispered promises of a future together. She even suggested that he leave his wife, Linda, and start a new life with her. Dr. Carter, however, had no intention of abandoning his family. To him, the affair was simply a diversion, something that would end when Emily's rotation was over. But Emily had other plans. In December 2019, things took a dark Emily discovered she was pregnant. She got this as a sign that their relationship was meant to be, a Carter to finally take the plunge and leave his wife. She excitedly told him the news one evening after hospital, expecting joy and relief in his response. But Dr. Carter's reaction was far from what she had hoped. Panic washed over his face as he realized the gravity of the situation. A child would ruin everything: his marriage, his career, his reputation. He begged Emily to get an abortion, promising her money and support if she went through with it. Emily, devastated and betrayed, refused. She believed that Dr. Carter would eventually come around, that he would see this as an opportunity to build a life with her and their child. Their once steamy affair quickly descended into a series of heated arguments and emotional confrontations. Emily threatened to reveal everything if Dr. Carter didn't leave his wife. She even hinted at telling the hospital board about their relationship, which would surely lead to his dismissal. Desperate and cornered, Dr. Carter realized that he had to find a way out before his life came crashing down. On the night of February 14th, 2020, the situation spiraled out of control. Emily called Dr. Carter to meet her at the small apartment she had rented close to the hospital. She was furious, accusing him of using her and discarding her like a piece of trash. She threatened to call his wife, Linda, right then and there. Dr. Carter, already on edge, tried to calm her down, but Emily was inconsolable. As the argument escalated, something inside Dr. Carter snapped. He grabbed Emily by the shoulders and shook her, screaming at her to stop. In a fit of rage, he pushed her, and Emily stumbled backward, hitting her head against the edge of the coffee table. She collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Dr. Carter stood there, his breath ragged, as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. He rushed to her side, frantically checking for a pulse. Emily was still breathing, but barely. Panicking, he grabbed his phone and hesitated. Calling 911 would mean the end of everything: his career, his family, his life as he knew it. Dr. Carter made a decision that would seal his fate. Instead of calling for help, he stood up, his hands trembling, and watched as the life drained out of Emily's eyes. Dr. Carter stood frozen in the dimly lit apartment, his heart racing as he watched Emily's body lying motionless on the floor. He couldn't believe what had just happened. It was supposed to be a simple confrontation, a chance to talk sense into her. Now, his world world was spiraling out of control. His mind raced through the potential consequences, losing his career, his family, and his freedom. He knew he needed to act quickly. Gathering his composure, he knelt down beside Emily and checked her pulse again. It was faint, but she was still alive. His initial panic gave way to a cold, calculated thought. He had to make sure there were no loose ends. He couldn't afford to let Emily wake up and ruin everything. Dr. Carter rushed to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of prescription sedatives from Emily's medicine cabinet, one he had written for her to help with the stress of her demanding intern schedule. His hands shook as he poured a lethal dose into a glass of water. Returning to the living room, he forced the liquid down her throat, ensuring she swallowed every drop. For a moment, he felt a sickening sense of relief. He had eliminated the immediate threat, but he still had a problem: her body. He couldn't just leave her there. Thoughts of the hospital's surveillance cameras, their phone records, and even the gossiping staff flashed through his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how many ways he could be connected to her. As he frantically scanned the apartment for a solution, his eyes landed on Emily's phone lying on the coffee table. He picked it up and quickly deleted any messages and call logs between them, wiping out any evidence of their relationship. But that was just a temporary fix. He needed to get rid of the body. Dr. Carter glanced around, noticing the large area rug beneath Emily's body. It was his only option. With a grim determination, he lifted her limp body and carefully wrapped her in the rug, securing it with duct tape he found in her kitchen drawer. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he struggled to lift the heavy bundle. He managed to drag it to the front door, his heart pounding in his ears. The next challenge was getting her body to his car without being seen. He peeked through the door's peephole and saw that the hallway was empty. Gathering every ounce of courage, he opened the door and dragged the rolled-up rug to the elevator. His hands were trembling, and his breath came in short, panicked gasps as he hit the button for the basement parking. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, he glanced around, ensuring the coast was clear before pulling the rug out and dragging it to his car. He opened the trunk of his black SUV, glancing nervously over his shoulder. It was the middle of the night, and the parking lot was eerily silent. With a grunt, he lifted the heavy bundle and shoved it into the trunk, slamming the lid shut. He slid into the driver's seat, his mind racing as he tried to think of a place to dispose of the body. He remembered an old abandoned construction site on the outskirts of town, a place he had passed a few times on his way to a rural clinic. It was secluded, and no one ever went there anymore. As he drove through the empty streets, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see flashing lights following him, but the roads were deserted. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew he needed to keep his cool if he wanted to get away with this. When he reached the construction site, he parked in a shadowy corner and quickly got out. He opened the trunk and, with a Herculean effort, dragged Emily's body out. The night was silent except for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He pulled the rug through the broken gate and into the site, where the foundations of an unfinished building lay like a gaping wound in the earth. Dr. Carter knew he had to act fast. He found a pile of loose dirt near the edge of the site and began digging with a shovel he had taken from his car. Each movement felt surreal, like he was trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Sweat poured down his face and his muscles ached, but he kept digging, driven by sheer desperation. After what felt like hours, he had a hole deep enough to hide Emily's body. He unwrapped the rug and looked down at her lifeless form one last time. A wave of nausea washed over him, but he forced himself to push her into the grave and cover her with dirt. When he was done, he collapsed on the ground, his body trembling from exhaustion and fear. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking, and walked back to his car. He dumped the rug and shovel into the trunk and drove away, his mind numb with shock. He had done it. He had eliminated the threat, but deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of his nightmare. Dr. Carter returned home that night, his clothes smeared with dirt, his mind reeling from the horror of what he had done. He slipped quietly into the house, careful not to wake his wife, Linda, who was fast asleep upstairs. He went straight to the bathroom, stripping off his clothes and tossing them into a garbage bag. He stepped into the shower, the hot water cascading over him, but it did nothing to wash away the guilt and fear gnawing at his soul. The next day at the hospital, Dr. Carter tried to maintain his composure, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone knew what he had done. Every glance from a colleague, every passing nurse seemed filled with suspicion. He kept his head down and focused on his work, pushing the events of the previous night into the farthest recesses of his mind. It didn't take long for Emily's disappearance to be noticed. She had missed her morning shift, and by noon, her colleagues were already concerned. The hospital administration tried reaching her, but all calls went unanswered. It wasn't long before the police were notified, and a missing person investigation was launched. Dr. Carter knew he needed to act normal, but the pressure was unbearable. He managed to answer questions from the police with a calm demeanor, mentioning that he hadn't seen Emily since their last shift together. He painted himself as a concerned mentor, worried about her well-being, but as the days went by, the anxiety of being caught gnawed at him relentlessly. 2 weeks after Emily's disappearance, a construction worker stumbled upon a patch of disturbed earth at the old construction site. He thought it was strange and decided to investigate. As he dug a little deeper, he was horrified to find what looked like the edge of a human hand emerging from the soil. Panicking, he called the police. The discovery of Emily's body sent shockwaves through the community and the hospital. The police launched a full-scale investigation, and suspicion quickly turned toward Dr. Carter due to his known close relationship with her. They combed through security footage and tracked down anyone who had seen Emily on the night she disappeared. A witness from a nearby gas station remembered seeing Dr. Carter's car pass by late that night, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but now loomed large in the investigation. The police questioned Dr. Carter again, this time with more intensity, but he stuck to his story, denying any involvement in her death. What ultimately sealed Dr. Carter's fate was a piece of evidence he hadn't considered: his phone's GPS data. Despite his attempts to cover his tracks, his phone had been tracking his location the entire night, from Emily's apartment to the construction site and back to his home. Confronted with this irrefutable proof, Dr. Carter's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The police obtained a warrant and searched his house. In the trunk of his car, they found traces of dirt and fibers matching the rug in which Emily's body had been wrapped. The garbage bag with his dirty clothes, hastily hidden in the attic, was discovered next. Each piece of evidence was like a nail in his coffin, tightening the noose around him. Under intense interrogation, Dr. Carter finally broke down. The reality of his crime, the life he had destroyed, and the career he had shattered came crashing down on him. He confessed to everything: the affair, the argument, the accidental push, and the desperate decision to end Emily's life. He detailed how he had buried her, hoping against hope that no one would find out. The trial was swift and sensational, with media coverage turning Dr. Carter into a symbol of corruption and deceit within the medical profession. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Linda, his wife, filed for divorce and took their children to another state, wanting nothing more to do with the man she had once trusted with her life. In prison, Dr. Carter was a broken man. He spent his days reflecting on the choices he had made, the temptations he hadn't resisted, and the life he had destroyed in his reckless pursuit of desire. Emily's death, a senseless tragedy born out of a moment of rage and panic, haunted him every day. His once celebrated career and the respect he had built over decades lay in ruins, all for a fleeting affair that ended in horror. The case of Dr. Samuel Carter and Emily Hayes became a cautionary tale, a dark reminder of how a life of privilege and power could be destroyed by a single, reckless act. The hospital established stricter guidelines for interactions between staff members, and the memory of Emily Hayes, a bright young intern whose life was cut short, lingered in the halls of St. Matthew's Hospital. But for Dr. Carter, there was no redemption, no escape from the consequences of his actions. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, forever haunted by the knowledge that his desires had led to the ultimate betrayal, the taking of an innocent life.